In this episode, I'm going to share encounters with Goatman. These stories include two boys who run into a monstrous creature while exploring an abandoned house, and a boy and his father in Sweden who saw something strange run across the path in the woods, followed by the strong scent of iron and blood. Before we get started, I just want to say that a lot of people turn to posting their stories online because they feel like they can't tell anyone and would be seen as crazy if they did. Most people who experience these beings are traumatized and feel the need to unburden themselves or just have someone who will believe them listen to their story. If you've had an encounter and you feel like you can't tell anyone for fear of being made fun of, ridiculed, called a liar, or any other reason, email me. You'll find a sympathetic ear here who will believe you. I do want to mention that just because you email me your story, it doesn't mean it will end up in an episode on my channel. Your story can stay between me and you if that's what you want. Also, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to come on an episode and tell your story, email me. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from a poster who shares his friend's encounter with what he believed was a Goatman in Oklahoma. His story takes place about an hour from Oklahoma City in the southern part of the state. At his job at a fast food restaurant, there's a lot of turnover, and being that he is a people person, he likes to get to know those who come through, and this is how he met his friend who shared with him his Goatman encounter. One day when he and his friend had the day off, they found themselves chatting about the supernatural. Even though he considered himself a skeptic, he was always intrigued by people's stories. When asked about the topic, his friend's demeanor shifted dramatically. His face turned a bit pale and he said he had a story. The original poster could tell from his friend's tone that he was serious, as this was odd behavior for him, being that he was usually very lively. Here's how his friend's story happened. One afternoon, he and his buddy decided to skip school in the very area where they now worked. The friend's father owned several properties, but there was one in particular that rarely saw any activity. It was a sprawling 30-acre plot, mostly covered in sparse trees and grass. What made this property intriguing was an old house, a vintage home from the 50s, 60s, or 70s that seemed to have been abandoned overnight, as if the occupants had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. With boredom creeping in and nothing else to occupy their time in rural Oklahoma, they figured it would be an adventure to explore the place. It was around 3 p.m. on a bright sunny day when they drove down the dirt road leading to the house. Upon arrival, they hopped out of their truck and made their way along the path, pushing open the gate as they stepped inside. The house stood 2 stories with a classic country design, complete with a spacious porch and a generously sized living room. As they approached, the old wooden boards of the porch creaked loudly beneath their feet, each step producing an unmistakable creaking sound. One of the boys chose to venture inside, leaving the door slightly ajar, while the OP's friend opted to explore the porch and its surroundings. As he wandered the porch, he found little of interest and decided to hop off and stroll around the side of the house. Midway through his exploration, he began to hear a strange sound. Heavy breathing accompanied by the thud of footsteps. Assuming it was just his friend inside, he pressed on, but as he rounded the corner, he was startled by a very loud bleating sound, the loudest he says he has ever heard. He stood frozen in place. His friend's father had never utilized this land and never had livestock on it. This made him wonder how or why there would be a goat there. Before he could react, a figure emerged from around the corner. It towered over him at nearly 7 feet tall and was lean yet muscular. As he nervously looked up at this thing, he was met with a sight that sent chills down his spine. This monstrous creature had a goat's head atop an imposing physique, staring directly at him. Panic surged through him and he bolted back down the path he had come from, screaming all the while. His friend, hearing the commotion, rushed out of the house shouting, asking what was going on. It was then that he noticed the figure now closer to the porch, looking at him. His fight or flight kicked in and he took off, flying past his friend and even tripping him in the process, perhaps even on purpose to further improve his chances of escape. The OP's friend, rattled but uninjured, scrambled back to his feet and continued to run, but not before looking back one last time at the house. There stood the Goatman, motionless in front of the house, watching them flee. They both made it back to the truck without incident, with him annoyed at his friend for knocking him down. They sped away, leaving the eerie scene behind. The lesson they learned from that day, according to him, was to never trespass on the Goatman's territory, and if you do, be able to outrun your, quote, friend. This story brings a whole new meaning to the saying, with friends like you, who needs enemies. I'd be pretty mad at my friend too if they tripped and knocked me down while running away from a creature like that. Now, he does say he isn't sure that he did it on purpose. He also says in his story that it looked like the family who lived in that house just up and left one day. Perhaps the Goatman was the reason for their abrupt departure. Or perhaps the Goatman found an abandoned property where it thought it wouldn't be bothered. One thing I always hear is that you shouldn't run during an encounter with a cryptid because you will normally get chased or worse. But these boys ran, and who can blame them, and were luckily able to escape unscathed. Well, other than one being knocked down in the process. What do you think about this one? And would you end a friendship if your friend knocked you down while running from a creature like that? The second and final story of this episode comes to us from Sweden, where one user posted his encounter with what he believed to be a Goatman. This is far from the first cryptid story I've heard come from Europe, which just adds credence to the cryptid phenomenon being worldwide. There are reports from countries all over the world. This one takes place on Sweden's west coast. It was around 5 p.m. and was already dark outside when the original poster and his father decided to take a walk in a forest about 10 minutes from civilization. They ventured without any lights, relying on the faint visibility of their surroundings while walking on the trail. As they strolled, they engaged in conversation and found themselves near a lake where a large group of around 50 ducks were peacefully floating on the water. Then, out of nowhere, a creature darted across the path about 25 meters ahead of them, moving swiftly from right to left and heading toward the lake before vanishing from their view. It stood roughly 150 centimeters tall and ran on all fours, but its front legs appeared much longer than its back legs, giving it a bipedal appearance. Its fur was a beige or brown color, and it was incredibly fast, making no sound except for the noise of its rapid movement. The ducks erupted into chaos, flying and quacking loudly, which seemed unusual for a simple deer passing by. Just after the creature sped past, a strong scent of iron and blood filled the air, a smell both of them noticed. He says here that he has never encountered a smell like that before, despite working in a hospital and frequently dealing with blood. He is truly captivated by events like these and firmly believes in various possibilities. However, his father is a skeptic, a realist, and a lover of science. Having grown up on a farm nestled in the heart of Sweden's forest, he has a deep understanding of the local wildlife. He insists that he has never encountered anything resembling that shape or moving with such speed. In his area, he doesn't have many large animals. The closest he might find is a deer, but they typically keep their distance from humans, and he's never witnessed one move that fast. Besides, all their legs are generally uniform in size, unlike this creature, which appeared to have a noticeably larger upper body. He titled his post Goatman due to the iron-like scent often mentioned in stories about this creature, and is really curious to hear what others think about what it could have been. He poses a series of questions including, was it an animal, a humanoid figure, and if it was a humanoid, what kind? He welcomes all opinions and is still shocked by the experience, yet to fully come to terms with. He ends his post by saying he's planning to return to the area the following day to look for any tracks or blood, in case that's what caused the smell. Unfortunately, though, there was not an update to his story. As I mentioned in the intro, this is definitely not the first cryptid story I've heard that comes out of Europe, but it very well could be the first Goatman encounter I've heard from there. I usually hear a lot of stories about Sasquatch and Dogman in the UK, along with a couple of other local cryptids. But the fact that I keep hearing stories out of Europe and from all over the world point to the fact that these creatures aren't just local to the United States, and this Sasquatch isn't local to just the Pacific Northwest like what we all thought back in the 90s. There are Sasquatch encounters as far as Australia who have what they call the Yowie, which is a Sasquatch-like creature. As far as this story goes, it's kind of hard to say what I think they might have seen that day, being that it ran across the path so quick and they didn't really get a good look at it. The OP mentioned that it was running on all fours, but he did say that it looked like the upper body was a lot shorter than the lower, which made it look like a bipedal creature. This wouldn't be the first cryptid that was bipedal that dropped down to run on all fours, as a lot of them typically tend to do that. What makes me agree that this probably was a Goatman was the scent that he smelled after this thing ran past, which was iron and blood. This is a scent that is usually described in a lot of Goatman encounters. However, without a solid physical description of this creature, I can't say that's what it was for sure. But as I just mentioned with the smell, that is a very distinct one that is usually only associated with Goatman. What do you think about this story? And what do you believe the OP and his father saw that day? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.